Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Clinical Research Forum today. We're really lucky today to have Celia Westemeyer and Meredith Rhodes here to talk with us about ClinicalTrials.gov again, but this time talking about the results section, which is a really exciting area and goes to more patient information around clinical trials. So I'm going to turn it over to Celia first.
Thank you, Betsy. Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. I'll give you a brief outline of what we're going to talk about. We'll briefly cover the laws, policy, and guidance, go over the results module, then Meredith is going to do a walkthrough of the PRS system, and then we have some resources for you at the end. We'll start with the laws, policy, and guidance, and this table shows all the different organizations and their rules and preferences around registration and results reporting. The FDA requires registration of interventional phase 2 through 4 trials of drugs or devices within 21 days of the first participant enrollment, and requires summary results data to be submitted within 1 year of the date that data collection was complete from all enrolled participants to answer the primary outcomes. The NIH policy applies to all clinical trials funded by the NIH, and they require registration within 21 days of the first participant enrollment. All NIH-funded clinical trials are now within the scope of the NIH policy on the dissemination of NIH-funded clinical trials information, and as such, summary results data are due within 1 year of participant primary completion date following the FDA law. CMS requires that studies be registered before enrollment begins. We have internal processes at the UW to catch these trials, and there are no specific results reporting requirements. The VA Office of Research and Development follows WHO and ICMJE guidance and requires all VA ORD funded human research, interventional or observational, to be registered and results reported within 1 year of the primary completion date. The International Committee of Medical Journal Editors needs registration prior to the first enrollment. While it's not required, a lack of registration will impact the ability to publish in journals. And as of last week, there are 8,200 some odd member journals. So the ICMJE encourages but does not require summary results to be posted to clinicaltrials.gov. They also point out that submitted summary results to clinicaltrials.gov does not mean that the data are previously published. All PCORI-funded human research is contractually required to be made publicly available, including protocol registration and results reporting to clinicaltrials.gov. The World Health Organization and World Medical Association offer ethical guidance for clinical trials transparency and encourage agencies to consider their guidance while they craft their own policies. Big takeaway from this table should be the repercussions of not registering and which entities require results reporting. As far as not registering, as I mentioned, the ICMJE can and will refuse to publish. The NIH can deny or take away your funding. The FDA has the ability to inflict monetary penalties. You can lose your HHS funding, impose FDA sanctions, and or issue public notices of noncompliance. And CMS can delay study initiation or delay or deny billing. While only the NIH and FDA require results, our best practice would be to report results on all registered trials for the sake of transparency. Even if a study terminates early, it is not powered for results, summary data is still due per FDA law. I'll go over a quick overview. The components of the module are the final protocol and statistical analysis plan, participant flow, baseline characteristics, outcome measures, adverse events, limitations and caveats, and certain agreements in the point of contact. The first section is the final protocol and statistical analysis plan. The final IRB approved protocol and SAT, if applicable, as a separate document, are required to be uploaded to ClinicalTrials.gov with the results. The SAT may be within the protocol, or it may be uploaded separately if the study analysis plan has changed after study participation is completed. Each document must include an official title, the NCT number, and document date. It must be uploaded in an archival PDF format, and it must not contain any PHI. The document section of the ClinicalTrials.gov record can be used to upload to the public any version of the informed consent form used to enroll any participant into the study to satisfy the requirements of the revised Common Rule. This must be done after the study is closed to enrollment and within 60 days of the completion of data collection. The next one is the participant flow, which is basically the consort diagram that you would include in any clinical trials publication that shows how participants were assigned to the arms or groups of a clinical study and how they progressed through the stages of the study. It consists of arm and group information, which represents all unique event sequences from enrollment to completion, recruitment details and pre-assignment details to describe recruitment process and events that occurred before participants were assigned to an arm or group, and participant data for each milestone in each period. Key points to remember about review criteria for this section are, one, that the information reflected here needs to be consistent with other sections of the record, including the number of participants analyzed for specific outcome measures. If it doesn't, the discrepancies need to be explained. The second is that no written results or conclusions should be included in this section. Next, we have the baseline characteristics. This section contains the demographics of the study participants, including age, gender, race, ethnicity, and region of enrollment. If the study has study-specific measures, such as height or weight, those would be included here also. The main thing to remember about review criteria for this section is to ensure the overall number of baseline participants is consistent with other parts of the record, particularly the participant flow. Of course, if there are inconsistencies, an explanation can be provided. The next section is outcome measures, which is really the bulk and meat of our results reporting. The purpose of the outcome measures module is to summarize results data by arm or group for each primary and secondary outcome measure assessed in the study. An outcome measure is an assessment used to determine the effect of an experimental value on participants in the study. The module consists of the title, description, time frame, arm or group title, the number of participants analyzed, and outcome measure data. Even if a study is terminated, remember, summary data is required along with the final study protocol. Complete results aren't required. Rather, whatever data were acquired need to be summarized and reported. The outcome measure title and outcome measure description should, taken together, provide enough information for the target audience, which is lay people, not specialists in the field, to understand the reported data. The time frame specifies the time points or period of time over which outcome measure data were assessed. The time points must be specific to the outcome measure and expressed from the participant's perspective. For example, we would use from enrollment to end of treatment at 12 weeks instead of until the end of the study. Each arm or group title is used as a column header for each outcome measure table and should be a descriptive label for the participants included. For example, saying placebo is more informative than saying group 1. Each arm or group description should accurately indicate what happened to the participants who are described in the corresponding column, with a detailed explanation of the interventions administered or the groups observed during each stage of the study. The overall number of participants analyzed row represents the number of participants in each arm or group who were measured and analyzed for the outcome measure and should match participant flow. If not, the analysis population description section should provide a brief, informative description of the criteria for who was or was not included in the overall number of participants. Outcome measured data can be reported in two ways: continuous data and discrete data. Continuous data can take any value on a continuum, for example, a mean or median, for which the measure of precision or dispersion is also reported. Discrete data are based on counts and are reported as an integer, such as count of participants who experience weight loss. Next slide. Some review criteria are that the measures be logical, accurate, relevant, descriptive, and consistent. So, your outcome measure title, description, time frame, and units of measure need to be logical. Outcome measure titles clearly and accurately indicate what was measured, not why it was measured, and what is reported in the data table. Measure description provides additional relevant information needed to understand the outcome measure data being reported. An outcome measure using a scale needs to be descriptive and should include the name of the scale in the title of the measure. You need to provide the range and direction of scores, such as 0 equaling worst and 10 equals best. And the unit of measure for a scale is units on a scale. If it is a measure of change, ensure it has 2 time points, which are specified in the time frame. For example, week 0 and week 52. Time frame needs to describe the time points at which the outcome measure was assessed and for which data are reported. The unit of measure is consistent with the title, description, and data entered. Only 1 unit of measure per outcome. The number of participants analyzed needs to be consistent with participant flow, or a complete and clear explanation should be provided in the analysis population description. We have some review comments, some common issues. They are categorized as either advisory issues or major issues. Major issues must be addressed, whereas advisory don't necessarily have to be. Just looks better if they are. Some examples are: an advisory issue is the overall number of participants analyzed is not consistent with numbers provided in any of the rows in the participant flow module. So revise to fix or explain the discrepancy. Some major issues are: the measure does not appear to include sufficient information to understand how outcomes are measured and reported. Required information appears to be missing. The scale is not defined, or the unit of measure is inconsistent with what is described. And the last one that we see is that the time frame does not appear to be specific and or in the correct format. Adverse events. The adverse event information module has 3 tables that summarize both anticipated and unanticipated events. It includes all cause mortality, which includes all deaths, whether study related, that occurred during the study, serious adverse events, and non-serious adverse events that occurred during the study and exceeded a specified frequency threshold. The data elements included in this module are the time frame over which AEs were collected, source vocabulary, and whether it was systematic or non-systematic assessment. Also included are the adverse event term, number of affected participants, and number of events. Key points to keep in mind about the review criteria for this section are that the time frame is specific and matches the protocol, that the number of participants at risk matches the number of participants who started the study and participant flow module, and no written results or conclusions are included in this section. Next, we have the limitations and caveats, which is an optional free text module used to describe any significant limitations of a study. Limitations may include technical problems with measurements leading to unreliable or uninterpretable data. It could also be that target enrollment was not reached, so there was insufficient power to measure the effect of the intervention. While it is optional, if it is needed, it will be held to the same review criteria as every other section. So to speak, don't include any language that could be seen as written results or conclusions. The final section is the certain agreements and results point of contact. These are grouped together under more information. Certain agreements is used to indicate whether all of the study's PIs are employees of the sponsor of the study. If they're not, indicate whether there's any agreement limiting the ability of the PIs to discuss or publish the study results. The results point of contact is the person best suited to provide scientific information about the study results. Finally, we have some best practices. We highly recommend populating and reviewing the results module within 10 months of study completion due to the complexity of the module, the amount of back and forth that usually occurs with the study teams, and internal reviews to ensure that we meet the 1-year deadline with complete and accurate data. We want to keep this record active and up to date throughout the life cycle. So part of our responsibility as a service line is to assist study teams in maintaining compliance and keeping the record up to date with the current protocol throughout the life cycle. Amendments that impact the public record need to be reflected, particularly if any of the study outcomes have changed. We do review ARROW weekly for protocol amendments that may impact the public record, and we'll reach out to the study teams to verify. Additionally, we monitor ENCORE on a weekly basis to keep up on study status. The results requirement applies regardless of the reason for study closure. So even if you terminate or low accrual, we have to provide those summary results. If during analysis different trends or results appear than expected, it is possible to add a statistical analysis plan to the results module to show these new analyses. And that would be part of the final protocol and statistical analysis plan. So thank you.
Right. Let me share my screen now. Can we all see my screen? Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Celia. We're going to get into the meat of the user interface now. We find that when we communicate with study teams about their results requirements, this is a key missing piece of the puzzle. Literally, what does it look like? What data is required? And how to navigate the system. We are in the PRS system here. This is the test system. This is the ClinicalTrials.gov protocol registration and results system. So the user interface where we register, maintain, and update results data, and then it gets reviewed by the PRS reviewers prior to being uploaded to the public record. This is the home page of the PRS system. And if you have access to any studies in the system, those will be shown here on the screen. If you do need access to any studies or would like to submit a new record, we can set you up with a PRS account and give you access to that system. One thing I want to point out throughout this system, there are numerous help and definitions links that are very useful, very helpful, and can help you to navigate the system independently should you wish to play around in there. One more thing here, this is what we now call the classic view of the PRS system. There will be a new view of this probably within the next year. The details of the record will not change, and the results and data requirements will not change, but the look is going to change over time. And so if you're watching this presentation at a later date, the system looks entirely different, this is why they're moving to an updated system. So when you come into the PRS, you locate the record that you're interested in updating and you click open on it. And I'm just going to give you a quick review of the parts of the record. You'll see a record status section at the top, and that gives us a little bit of details about whether or not results are due. You'll have a link to previous reviews of the record and who released those. There's a protocol section. This is where we register the record to the public, and this should always accurately reflect the most recently IRB approved protocol. There's a document section that is required for upload of the final protocol and statistical analysis plan with the results. We can also use this section to upload the informed consent form as a contingency of the revised common rule. And then finally, the results section at the bottom with all of the parts that Celia just reviewed. And I'm going to dive into the protocol section really quick to show you some very important and cutting edge science that is completely made up for your information, just to show you, orient you to the details of the study for which I'm about to show you the results for. So we have a study about Pi Day and wellness. That's our title, a randomized double-blind crossover study of sweet versus savory intervention and its effect on wellness. We completed this study back on Pi Day in 2022. The purpose of this is to investigate whether a sweet versus savory intervention will significantly improve subjective wellness of the participants. We had 100 participants enrolled, and it's a crossover study, so they're trying each intervention. We have some hypotheses we listed on the record. We're describing that it's blinded. The actual number of participants enrolled was 100, and this is an important piece of the protocol record that moves into the results record. And we find when we have the actual enrollment in the protocol section, oftentimes it's different than what's reported in the results section. And we have to either resolve that by changing the actual enrollment so it matches, or otherwise describing why that discrepancy exists. There's an outcome measure section that should always be up to date with respect to the protocol, and that moves to the results section once you open the results data. And we are perfectly willing and very interested in sharing our data. So we've put the individual participant data sharing statement in here. And this, we, as a best practice also going forward, will populate any data sharing for the NIH requirements for data sharing. If there's anything in the protocol that outlines the data sharing policies, we'll populate that in this section. So that's the protocol section. Let's look into the document section. So this is where we upload that final protocol with statistical analysis plan. And I just want to show you, it's all documents that we upload to the document section are required to have a cover page on them with the full title, the NCT number, and the version date. The date that it was IRB approved. Sometimes there won't be a standalone protocol document. We have some studies that do not have one. They have chosen a different IRB application, and it's based on an NIH grant, for example. So we do have to upload what amounts to a protocol document here if there is no standalone protocol that exists. We've done this by essentially copying parts of the grant proposal that has already been approved by NIH and awarded. So if that is you, we can help you to come up with a document that will satisfy the criteria of the final protocol to the record here. Also, again, this is a place where we can upload any version of the informed consent form that was used to enroll any participant. So if you have 5 different informed consent forms, it doesn't have to be all 5, just any one of them to the public record to comply with the revised common rule. And again, that also needs a cover page with the title, the NCT number, and document date. And finally, the results section. We'll kind of walk through this a little more slowly. Again, when we look into the PRS, there's again these help and definition links throughout. And so they are a great place to start if you have questions. And always, always reach out to our service line if you would like help or you would like for us to populate this record for you. That is always an option. We also provide this kind of tour one-on-one and answer your questions personally. So we'll click into each section and show you sort of the flexibility of each section. Again, the participant flow, like Celia described earlier, is kind of the numbers of participants in each group and how those numbers may have changed throughout the intervention period and the number of participants who have completed the study. We always need to indicate if the number of participants who started the study is less or is more than the number who completed the study, we need to account for those reasons not completed. And I'll click into this to show you what it looks like. So the protocol enrollment, in this case, we had 100 actually enrolled in the protocol section, and that will be the number that is brought down into the results section. If it's any different, we would change that here and we would describe why. We can include recruitment details in the participant flow section. Typically, I look, if I'm using Encore as a guide, I will look to see and what month and year the first participant was enrolled and through what month and year the last participant was enrolled. And I will just kind of put the enrollment period into the recruitment details. Again, a free text field. A lot of these are character limited, and you'll find that out as we go here. It'll tell you exactly how many characters are remaining in that field. Pre-assignment details, if you had any screening or eligibility or any kind of information you wanted to list up front. And then you would select your arms and groups. These are customizable. You can go in and add more arms and groups as necessary. You can move them around. You can also add units if you have a study that is not measuring from is other than participants. So you're studying number of tests taken, for example. You can put add a different unit here to include the numbers of tests and how they were progressed throughout the study. So there's a flexibility here to move from participants to other than participants in units. You can add periods to the study. And in this case, we had a first intervention, we had a washout period, and then we had a second intervention. And you can see here in our washout period, in those participants who were already had their sweet pie intervention. Some of them didn't want to come back for the savory pie. So we lost a couple to follow up in that intervention. And then we had the final numbers completed at the end. The reasons not completed are, there's a drop-down list. You can use AE, you can use death, lack of efficacy, loss to follow-up, physician decision, pregnancy, protocol violation, withdrawal by subject, or other. And then there's a little free text field to describe what other might be. Anytime you want to save a change, of course, click save. If you just want to go back, you can click cancel. So that is the participant flow section. The baseline characteristics section looks like this, and baseline characteristics are for all participants who started the study, or however you define that. There's a place to put baseline analysis population description here. If your numbers are different than and don't add up to the final enrollment, there is a way to describe that discrepancy here. Baseline measures are per group as outlined in the protocol. And so what is required in the baseline measure section is some age information for the populations, sex, gender information for the populations, generally as a count of participants, ethnicity data, and race data. And there's also a way to customize ethnicity and race data if the NIH template doesn't fit your needs. There's a region of enrollment, and in our case, it's not 100%, but for the most part, United States. And then you can add other study-specific baseline information here. We just added we surveyed our population to see who knew about Pi Day. And so we're putting that here in this study relevant baseline measures. So there's a number of different ways you can update and change these sections. And one more piece to follow up on here, there's per group and then total. So for the age, for example, the mean age for each group and the mean age for all participant populations. Oftentimes, if Celia and I are populating a results module based on a manuscript that's been already published, sometimes the total population isn't included in that. So that's just to be aware that there's each group and then total for the baseline measures. Moving to the outcome measure section, per FDA law, FDA law, per NIH policy, which follows FDA law, anything funded by the VA as contractually obligated through PCORI, and generally as a best practice, this module is due. Per FDA law, it is primary and secondary outcome measures that are due within 1 year of data collection complete to answer the primary outcomes. And in that case, these other pre-specified measures are not required because there's some understanding that they may be very exploratory and could potentially lead into another study in the future. But we would encourage you to report your summary data from the outcome measures that you registered. We'll go through a couple of these measures. So for primary outcomes, there's some kind of specific and a little bit wonky guidance around primary outcomes and timeframes. For primary outcomes specifically, they would like you to register each specific time point of data collection to its own outcome measure, unless you are reporting a change. And so in this case, we're reporting a change in the joy score before and after eating pie. So we have a time frame of a pre-test study visit, post-test study visit, up to 30 minutes each visit. Visits are separated by 1 week on study. So we were pretty specific about when the data is collected, and it's collected up to a week on study. So those are changes, and we can get away with putting multiple time points into a primary outcome measure time frame because we're measuring the change between those time points. If this was just an absolute score that we were posting here, and we were taking the absolute score at the beginning and then the absolute score at the end of the study, they would request that we put those in 2 specific outcome measures. And this is because of they are trying to make things incredibly transparent and easy to follow, basically. They're trying to, the PRS is trying to keep what is in the protocol. Every data point that is proposed in the protocol, they want to see data for in the outcome measures section. There's historically been, I think, primarily industry studies that have cherry picked their data and only shown data up to, for example, 6 months on study rather than a year that they had promised per protocol, and it made their data look a lot better to only show some of it. So they want to make sure all data points per protocol are listed. Anything else I should say here? So we have opportunities to add various data point or various time points by adding rows. We can change the number of participants analyzed at each time point because odds are that will change, particularly if you've enrolled a lot of participants. And so you can be a little more transparent about, how many data points you have for your mean measure at the time. And then the unit of measure, it proposes a number of units of measure based on the, commonly reported units. And in this case, we're reporting a score. And because we're reporting a score, we have to make sure that we have defined that score specifically in the outcome measure description. So here we're saying the scale is from 1 to 10, where 1 is no joy and 10 is extremely joyful. So that when people are reading this, they can see, they can make sense of that data being presented to them. You can, for each outcome, add statistical analyses. They are not a required section, but oftentimes outcomes are specifically statistical. And so in those cases, this is where we add that data. This is also a really great time to note that a biostatistician may want to be involved in either populating or QCing your results module. Because this is their vocabulary in here. This is where they will make sure that the results are posted per their calculations. So in the statistical analysis, you can select the arms and groups you're comparing. You can add more details about that. You'll have the opportunity to select which type of statistical test you've run. There's more free text field to understand more about details of the power calculation, for example. You can add your p-value, and oftentimes when we're populating a statistical section, it's essentially we're just adding a p-value between two groups, and this is the only thing we really populate. But there's plenty more to add to clarify where that value came from, what type of method was used. You can um, suss out the method of estimation down here, which includes a decent list, and then other, in case you don't see what your method of estimation on this list, the estimated value, confidence intervals, um, and then any other statistical analyses. Just like in any other part of the record, they won't accept results in free text fields, and so it's important to understand what your statistical descriptions are versus adding results to the free text field. We can, if we have additional results data, we would add either additional statistical analyses to report those results, or we would figure out a different way to report those results, perhaps as an actual outcome measure rather than a statistical analysis add-on to a measure. So there's a lot of information in this section. And again, to really be transparent with how you've interpreted your results, this is a really great place to get down to the details. There's also, these are all pretty quantitative outcomes, but there's also ways to report qualitative outcomes. The system is not really well designed, so we're kind of like MacGyvering this into the system a little bit, because qualitative outcomes are important and part of many studies, but this is really pretty well designed for quantitative but not qualitative. So how do we do qualitative outcome? We describe, this is a great example from that we borrowed from a recent results module that Celia populated. Participants were asked to briefly summarize their impressions of their first study visit. Qualitative analysis will proceed concurrently with data collection to allow identified themes to be explored in the future. In qualitative research, this involves both coding the written transcripts and then modeling the coded data. All team members will analyze the data and look for themes and trends that are emergent from the data. Several themes were identified in first participant test, impressions, and primary themes are reported below with participant counts. So you can see, like, we had primary themes and we're just reporting the number of participants associated with those themes. So that kind of forces a little quantitative measure onto a qualitative outcome. Also, all of the overall number of participants analyzed in each section, if those are different, if they are at all different than anything we've posted in the participant flow section, we would need to describe that here in the analysis population description. We would also consider perhaps adding a milestone to the participant flow to further alleviate that discrepancy and make sure we have all of the numbers are internally consistent in the results section. Just of note, just an observation from having done this for 5 years, some protocols are incredibly aggressive and have lists 40 plus outcome measures in them. And so these can get pretty long. I think when this system was first developed, it was originally rolled out in the year 2000. The results were beginning to be required in the year 2007. There was some uh, expectation that, or I don't know whose expectation it was, that for each protocol there would be one primary outcome, maybe a handful of secondary outcomes, and then maybe an exploratory outcome. And so um, over the time that I've been doing this, I've seen more and more, like many more outcomes listed on protocols. And it's pretty important from a legal perspective through FIDA law that all primary and secondary outcomes are registered and reported. And it's pretty important to make sure that they are noted as such in the protocol as primary and secondary or tertiary or exploratory outcomes to clarify the outcome measure type is very important for legal and policy implications. We'll move into the adverse events section. Just to remind you once again, every time we have one of these sections, there's help and definitions links at the top. The adverse events section has a sort of an introduction, and then it asks for data on all-cause mortality, serious adverse events, and then other not including serious adverse events. The expectation is that any AE data, whether or not it is understood to be related to the intervention, be reported. For some studies, there are pages and pages of adverse events data. And so we're allowed to do a frequency threshold for reporting adverse events. So if 5% of the population experience it, for example, we can report that to in an attempt to make the AE data a little more manageable. So the things to report or to understand here in this section at the top, we're looking at the time frame of AE collection from a participant perspective. All of this, the whole entire record from registration to results is from the participant perspective, from when the participant is on study to when they're off study. So if your study lasts in total for 3 years, up to 3 years is not appropriate for the time frame unless a participant is on study for 3 years, and that's their time frame of data collection. There is a place for the source vocabulary to be included and the collection approach, whether it's systematic or non-systematic assessment. We bring our arms and groups down. In every section, we can just copy those arms and groups down to the next section, or we can customize them as relevant. Oftentimes, outcome measures are specifically just for one group and not both groups or as many groups as you have. And so we have the ability to delete groups and just post the data for the relevant group. All-cause mortality, everything looks like this coming into the AE section. We have the number affected at the top and the total number of participants at risk on the bottom. So the total number of participants at risk should be, all those participants that started the study and for which there is baseline data for. To add adverse events, you can add a serious adverse event. For example, you would put the adverse event term in there. You would select the organ system affected. You can add any additional information about the particular adverse event. The source vocabulary would populate down if you put that in the top part of the AE section. And then let's just pick something here. And then you have the ability to go ahead and say, we had one person affected, and then we can say also not required, but additional information is the number of events that happened for each AE or SAE, and you can add them this way. There's another way to, oops, it's telling me I have an error. That's a great example here. You'll get these error messages if there's some internal validation errors. And here I have 0 people were affected by serious adverse events, but I've just included one in there. So we're going to change that to get rid of that error. For AEs, if there are hundreds, tens or hundreds, there's an upload and download feature that we are happy to help you with. We often do this ourselves by downloading information out of Encore, and then we can upload it. We have to do a little bit of data management, and then we can upload that to the system in one fell swoop, which is pretty nice. Limitations and caveats. Again, we have a 500 character limit right here, but oftentimes people would put why that just to remind people that if it's underpowered for meaningful results. Like if your study was terminated with 5 participants and you were aiming for 100. We had a lot of this over the pandemic, for example, where studies were terminated because it was nearly impossible to recruit or unsafe to recruit participants during that time period. So the study was terminated, and results were still due because they were applicable clinical trials per FADA. So I guess data is still due because if it's underpowered for meaningful results, you are essentially reporting the data that you collected and not necessarily in any interpreted results. Again, the more information section, this is just a way to say, hey, was everyone employed by the sponsor? Yes, no. If you put no, it's going to ask you results disclosure restriction on PI. So there's a little bit of logic internally here. We're looking for anything contractual or any bias in this, basically. And the results point of contact in case anyone has any questions. The ClinicalTrials.gov database. I always like to remind study teams is a great place to do some research, to connect with like-minded researchers or to build collaborations because you can search your intervention or any sort of detail about your study and look for those summary results out there that may have already been posted globally. And we can, once we're done populating everything and we don't have any error messages, we can preview the results, and it shows us kind of how they're going to look once they're published online. Oftentimes if I've populated results for a study team, I'll send them a PDF of this and I'll note questions on it for them to answer. If we go back to the summary page, there's a handy dandy spelling. It doesn't like Teddy Wedgers, but I know that is right. So I'm going to ignore that. And I didn't expand this acronym. And so maybe I could define what IRB is specifically in the meat of this protocol. So that's a handy place to go just to make sure you've got everything spelled correctly and all of your acronyms defined. once a results module is completed and has all these green check marks, which means it basically passes internal validation checks. You will click on this button that says entry complete at the top. And at that point, Celia and I will get a message that you've populated your results module and you think it's ready to go. And we will do our sort of internal review on that based on all of the feedback we've already received from the PRS reviewers. We have a number of common errors that we have seen time and time again. So we're going to do a quick review of your record just to make sure some of those errors are corrected in advance of releasing it to the PRS. The PRS will have up to 25 days to review your record for completeness, for internal consistency, logic, all of the things that Celia had mentioned previously. And then they'll get back to us with, hey, this looks great. It's going to be published. It could take a few days. Or, hey, this looks great. We have some suggestions for clarity. And those would be advisory comments. Or we're unable to approve this as is. We have some major issues and expect corrections. While we think it's a best practice to submit summary results, I have to admit, if it's not due per NIH or FDA law, they don't prioritize reviewing those results. And we have actually had at least one investigator who really continues to want to get their results in the public on ct.gov, and it's been 6 months and they haven't completed their review yet. So they will prioritize results that are due per FDA law or per NIH. If you voluntarily submit results, we cannot promise any kind of fast turnaround time. They will get out there eventually, but we're at the mercy of their staff restraints at that point. Again, I think that's about it for our tour of the PRS. And if you at all are interested in learning more about this or just need some one-on-one training, we are available. Let's see if I could fire up our resources page. Is the resources page showing? I don't think it is. Let me see if I can get that.
It's up there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So we have, we'll share these slides, and we have a number of, we have at least 3 pages here of resource links, including to our service line website, to the public site, the test site, if you're at all interested in getting in learning. It would be a great graduate student thing, to be honest, to get in there and start learning that for their careers ahead. There's information about, is it an applicable clinical trial? We have NIH clinical trial decision trees, links to our own KB, ICMJE. We have results review criteria, which is a PDF that is posted on right in the PRS system. There's a number of clinical trials transparency resources. These YouTube links, I will make sure to further characterize those, but those are FDA resources that have recently come out. And there's more information on public disclosure of clinical trials results, PCORI, data management policies and such. So plenty of resources around clinical trials transparency. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but we keep it growing. So thank you so much.